Hi everyone. Hello, and apologies for the late start, technical problems. Despite the fact that we're a room full of technical people, we still cannot get the tech right. Such is life. I hope you're all having a good morning. I myself am not very awake. I hope you had a good day one if you were there. I was not, so maybe it was good. So my name is Bex Edmondson, and welcome to my talk on the care and keeping of graduate game devs, why to hire them, and how to help them grow. So I'll have time for a few questions at the end, depending on how fast I talk. I was 20 minutes at my run-through last night, so let's hope I slow down a little bit. So for a bit of background on me, I'm currently a junior developer at Hutch over in Shoreditch, and Hutch makes mobile racing games, specifically ones including Hill Dash, which is actually not on this slide, Top Drives, and my personal favourite, Hot Wheels Race Off, which is, I'm a little bit biased because, I mean, it's the only one of our release games that I've actually worked on, but it is genuinely a good game, judging by the downloads at least. It's been downloaded over 40 million times worldwide, which is a number I still can't quite wrap my head around. Yeah, I've also had the privilege of being an ambassador for the European Women in Games organisation, which I've been since January last year, I think. So when Byron put the call out for speakers for Include, I really wasn't sure what I'd be talking about. He clearly had confidence in me, immediately putting me as the keynote for day 2. But I ended up frantically racking my brains about what I felt qualified to talk about. I could tell you how to get a job in the games industry because I've done that, but I've already done that talk twice, and most of you probably don't need to hear that. So then I thought, okay, after a job, what did I do next? And it came to me. I learned stuff, but there's absolutely no way that I'd be able to have learned as much as I have so far without my wonderful colleagues who have helped me get to where I am. So this is a little bit of a thank you letter to my employer and to my unofficial mentor who, side note, is leaving me to move to America next week. A little bit heartbroken, but that's how much of an impression he's made on me, because I know I'll be fine, but also at the same time a bit like, don't leave me here alone, I don't know what I'm doing. But they've done such a great job, so I thought I'd talk a little bit about what it was like to be helped to where I am and why you should take a chance on people like me. So yes, as you might have guessed by looking at me, I'm pretty personally invested in the topic of this talk because I was hired as a graduate game developer about a year and a half ago in August 2016. I was actually the first graduate ever hired at Hutch. I studied computer science and maths at the University of Exeter with a year in industry working in your average software development job, and while it was fine, I came out of it knowing that I would much rather be working in the wonderfully creative industry that is games, because standard software development is boring. So I built a game for my dissertation. I applied to a million game development jobs and got a job offer at Hutch, moved to London, and here I am. So I am endlessly grateful to Hutch for taking a chance and hiring me. Hiring a graduate when you've never done so before can seem hugely risky. But at the risk of sounding extremely vain, can pay off. But I hasten to add, you shouldn't just hire graduates for the sake of hiring graduates. They are an investment. We are an investment. I'm going to refer to graduates as they, because I don't know whether I count as one anymore. But yes, you will need to set aside time and energy to invest in your graduates. So, why exactly should you hire a graduate game developer? To begin with, it's just plain good for your organisation. I'll start by mentioning the obvious thing first, just to get it out of the way. Graduates are cheap. They are cheaper to hire than more experienced developers. Cheaper salaries mean more room for budgets for everything else. Granted, they won't be as useful to start with, but given time and investment, graduates can become really valuable team members, grown in-house to fill the exact role you need. I will, brief side note caveat to say, please don't take advantage of the cheapness. We might be cheap, but we are worth employing, so our time and energy and efforts are worth a reasonable salary at least. From a less utilitarian perspective, age diversity in any organisation is a positive thing. Young people will have new ideas and perspectives, coming at problems and concepts without previous experiences limiting them. They won't have solved similar problems before, so they'll be coming at them kind of laterally, with fresh eyes. This is especially true for the current generation of graduates. I'd probably go so far as to say that students have never been more different than those 20 years older than them, They've grown up surrounded by technology, just completely immersed in it. My sister, who's 19, which is only a few years younger than me, doesn't even remember a time before the internet was everywhere. She doesn't even really remember VCRs, which is a bit like, okay, I remember those. Graduates' worldviews are just so fundamentally different, and that comes with radically different ideas. Excuse me. Of course, no industry experiences limiting them also means they might come at problems without knowing what's actually useful. So this is why diversity is important. Having graduates spend time with more senior developers means that you can achieve a good balance of new innovation and improvement on tried and tested concepts. Alongside this, working with junior developers can be great for senior devs too. For those in management, when senior developers are trusted with mentoring a junior developer, it demonstrates you have confidence in them and their abilities while simultaneously developing their leadership skills. And for senior developers yourselves, while you're mentoring, you're quite likely to learn stuff too. If you cultivate an environment where asking questions and questioning the norm is encouraged, you'll find yourselves doing the same. As well as this, senior developers can pass off the easy tasks to junior developers. You know, like the sorts of things that individually would take about 10 minutes, but they kind of pile up and take up loads of your time. But if you pass them off to your graduates, not only will they be new and exciting tasks, they'll learn a lot from them as well. And it'll free up senior developers to do more important and complicated things. Graduates are also more likely to pick up new tools quickly. Like I say, they've grown up with technology. And this is speaking from experience as well. 2 weeks after I started my year in industry, I ended up being the one to figure out how to use Jira filters for my boss, who'd been in tech for like 20 years. And yet I, 2 weeks into my first ever industry job, was figuring out things for him. More specifically to games, though, is the fact that graduates are pretty likely to be part of your target market. Having your target market on your team will instantly make your game better, and it'll mean that you don't do things like this, which is profoundly cringeworthy. It's just not possible to know what another generation likes better than your own does, no matter how much your market research you do. Even just on a surface level, I have seen too many companies just try to relate to a generation they don't know anything about. It's always embarrassing. There is, in fact, an entire subreddit dedicated to companies misusing memes. So even just having somebody to be there like, yeah, no, don't do that on the company Twitter, you'll be a laughingstock, would be extremely useful. So speaking more practically, finding graduates to hire is relatively easy, provided that you advertise your job beyond the bare minimum of like, it's on the website buried in a list of job openings. Job applications will flood in, you'll end up looking like this. According to Yuki's Game Industry Fact Sheet, the total number of people working in games in 2015 was about 10,000 people in the UK. And at the time, there were 5,000 students in game-specific degree courses. Clearly, there's an imbalance. Too many graduates, not enough jobs. Which is why game industry jobs are so in demand for graduates. And that's not even touching on people like me. In 2015, I think I just decided that I wanted to go into games, just about. But I was studying a general computer science course, so nothing to do with games at all. So yeah, there's no shortage of graduates wanting to apply for games jobs at all. None whatsoever. So you'll be able to sift through a huge amount of people to find the best of the best. Also, once you've found the person that you do want to employ, practical things like relocation and that sort of thing are very unlikely to get in the way and have to make you start the whole process all over again, which I found is apparently a common thing, according to Hutch at least. Another pretty compelling argument is that if you don't hire graduates now, you won't have any mid-level devs in 5 years, you won't have any senior devs in 10 years. Finding a senior developer is hard now. Imagine trying to do that when there just aren't any. So, going back for a second, I'm going to talk a little bit more about why it's a good thing that graduates are completely new. They are clean slates, ready to change and learn extremely rapidly. They've just come out of what was probably about 17 years of just constant schooling. And they are primed to absorb whatever it is that you want to teach them. They've also got a lot fewer bad habits, whether that's coding habits specifically or anything up to and including like interpersonal habits. And it'll be much easier to get them to change their habits if they're bad than somebody who's had them for decades. they're easier to mold into the exact role that you need. Do you need someone who's mostly client-side UI development, but with a bit of knowledge of your generic platform code that you've got, with enough know-how to fix some things on your server? Finding a person for that exact role would be extremely difficult, but you can grow a graduate into that role and make them perfect for it. Also, their base knowledge is more likely to be up to date. Games courses in particular are very new, and so is the content they teach. So any graduates coming straight from those courses will be starting off with the most recent tech. No unlearning of old workarounds for old tech necessary. Graduates are also likely to love their jobs. For many, getting into the games industry is the dream. I couldn't believe it when I got my developer job in the games industry in London. It was literally the ideal. It ticked all of the check boxes. Like, the chances of this happening is just unreal. I spent my teenage years growing up in the credit crunch, knowing that I was going to be graduating into the worst job market for my age bracket since like the 1930s. So I'm very aware that I'm profoundly lucky to have any job, let alone one that makes people's jaws drop when I tell them that what I do for a living. And I'm so lucky that I get to do this for a living. Like, how many people who've been working in the industry for like 5 years still come to work most days genuinely excited? And a bonus to this is that when you introduce fresh and new people into a team, their excitement is infectious. People just can't help but get a little bit more motivated when you add fresh, enthusiastic people to a team. So I'm hoping all of that might have convinced you to hire a graduate. So once you've done the whole hiring thing, sifted through the piles of applications that you will almost inevitably get, what happens next? Once you've done the hiring thing, found the right person, got them in, got their laptop set up, all the accounts activated, what happens next? They need to make something. So I'm going to be speaking specifically about how to mentor and teach a client-side developer, seeing as that's what I am. But a fair amount of what I say will be applicable to multiple disciplines. So the first big thing I'd like to ask of you is to approach them with empathy. Quick side note, Google image search results for empathy, really weird. This is like the best one that I could find. They're all like people like sitting like this, stressed on a chair with some like concerned looking person hovering over them, super strange, or like somebody pulling a heart out of their head and handing it to someone, really weird. Best one I could find. Yes, so please be nice to your graduates. Like I said, they're ready to learn and change very, very quickly. And they're doing all of that at the same time as learning how to function as like an actual human adult. This can be extremely overwhelming. I speak from personal experience. I had a bit of a head start at the whole adulting thing when I started at Hutch, having done my year in industry. But I still found myself pretty stressed out, trying to fit like life around this thing that was now taking up 40 hours of my week, not even including traveling. And like I say, graduates change very, very quickly. But this is not just in terms of work. I was still trying to figure out who I really was outside of the confines of structured education, and I still am a bit, to be honest. And just for a kind of metric on how much I personally have changed in the past year and a half, I want to show you a photo of what I looked like on the day that I graduated. So here is me right now in front of you. See me? My friend described me as a little, I think it was eccentric punk grunge, which, yeah, I can see that. My trousers don't have any holes in today, but they normally do. And here is me at graduation. So for those of you who are watching the recording and maybe don't have visuals, I'm in a fairly short, flowery dress, wearing nude heels. I've got long red hair and little kind of shaded square glasses, and I don't look anything like that right now. I've got like a pink undercut. Used to be a mohawk, but I don't know how my hairdresser made it do the up thing. So yeah, I just look radically different. So if I change this much in just like personal appearance, imagine how much I've changed as like a human. So I was trying to figure all of this out at the same time as like learning and growing and working and doing all of the things, and it's very complicated. So please be forgiving to your new graduates who make mistakes. They will make mistakes because it's just they're doing a lot. They're doing a lot. So when I was planning this talk, I asked around to various developers that work at various companies just to see what their advice would be about helping out graduates. And one person, who shall remain nameless, told me that he wouldn't give me any advice, because it would sum up to never ever hire a graduate. I was a little bit taken aback, to say the least, considering that I knew for a fact that he knew I'd been hired as a graduate. So I inquired as to exactly why he thought he'd tell me that, and he told me that he'd had really bad experiences working with graduate developers before. After a bit more probing on my part, okay, that's a reasonable reason, provided that the bad experiences are genuine, it was revealed that he'd worked with a graduate who'd been given a really complex task, left to his own devices to implement it all, and after he'd finished, everyone else had to use this system, and not only was it badly written and instructed, but also really buggy, and it didn't really do what it needed to do. This was not the graduate's fault. This lays squarely at the feet of the person who was supervising, or rather, not supervising them. In short, my advice to you is do the opposite of this. So tip number 2 after empathy, don't throw them in at the deep end. Just don't do it. The first couple of tasks that you give them are really, really important. They'll lay the groundwork for how your new team member feels about their job and their abilities. So start simple. Make the first task something really easy, like changing a string based on some properties that already have been set up. Something that would be like really mundane for a senior developer, but it still has an effect on the game. Make it super, super easy. Walk them through what they need to do, walk through the basic structure of the code that they're going to be encountering. And just so it's not quite so intimidating, be immediately available for any questions they might have during this first couple of tasks. The next task should be like that, but more. A little bit more complicated, a chance for them to use what they've just learned and apply it by themselves. Hutch got this exactly right with me. Looking back, I am so impressed. For a little bit of context, Hot Wheels Race Off is a fun kind of physicsy game that involves driving a car along a 2-dimensional-ish track, avoiding obstacles, attempting not to fall into a pit or land upside down. Whenever you do a stunt or a wheelie, you get stunt points. You get stunt points, which add up until you get a certain number of points, and then once you've got a certain number of points, you get a chest, and then you get things. Most of the system was already set up, and I was given a little task to show a little animated phrase on screen whenever you successfully do a stunt, which looks like that. All the animations were already there, the UI artist had put them all in place. I was just responsible for detecting the stunt system. That was all in place. I was just responsible for taking the system and plugging it into the UI. So it's pretty much a perfect task to get early on. It was straightforward, relied on an existing system, so I didn't have to do anything too complicated. It was visible. It made me feel like I had a real effect on the game. I could play the game, and I could see the thing I did, and isn't that look, I made a thing do something, feeling the best part of coding. It was also pretty self-contained, and didn't affect anyone else's code. Where's the rest of my bullet points? Alright, well that's good. It's just kind of removed. Anyway, didn't affect anyone else's code, so there was no danger that I'd end up breaking stuff for other people. Gave me a good first look at how the UI was set up, how animations worked, how the localization system worked, but straightforward enough that I could grasp it all pretty quickly. It also set me up to work with the stunt system further down the road. I ended up rebuilding it by the time that Hot Wheels was released. Use these first few tasks to get a real idea of where your graduate is at, where their strengths are, where they're going to need help, that sort of thing. This will enable you to give them a better experience and more targeted help, which will help them grow faster. Tip number 3, give them clear guidelines each time they start a task. Make sure they know exactly what they should be doing and what they should be aiming for. Doing things with only half a design and vague instructions is difficult for any developer, but especially for someone who is totally new to it. Early on, you should also give them an overview of the ecosystem of your game. Do you have underlying platform code? What's the current structure of your code? This should just be at a surface level to begin with, because your graduate isn't going to really understand it until they've played around with it a little bit for themselves. But it's a really good idea to have kind of at least a vague idea of where their tasks fit into the big picture. Also, don't forget to tell them where they fit into the overall organization structure. Give them a walkthrough of how the teams are structured and separated, and how management is structured too. It doesn't have to be too complicated, but it gives them a useful kind of head start when they meet someone new to begin with, and helps them see how they contribute to the overall company rather than just what they're doing at any given time. Tip number 4, if I haven't made it clear already, do not leave them entirely to their own devices. They are learning. You have experience. They're trusting you to help them do things right. You need to be the one to guide them back onto the right track when they're making mistakes. Some mistakes are obvious. They will know they're making a mistake if their code is not compiling. But there's lots of other more complicated mistakes they could be making, like if the right data structure to use, like whether it's going to be efficient, that sort of thing. It takes experience and time, and you have that, and they don't. So you need to help them out. So after they've done a few tasks, you can start to ease off a little bit. You don't have to be available constantly, but still most of the time when they're starting out, but you can kind of tail off a little bit. Cultivate an environment where both asking questions and making mistakes is not just okay, it's encouraged, and be patient and open with them as they begin to start doing stuff for themselves. And trust them to be able to do the tasks you give them. They may not be able to do it the most optimal way, but they might. And even then, does it really matter if it's the most optimal way? If they're getting to do stuff and they're learning stuff and they're taking tasks off you, so you don't have to do it. And they might not do it the way you'd think of doing it, but different certainly doesn't mean worse. And encourage them to use outside sources to solve problems creatively. Google is a developer's best friend, no matter what university exams might try to tell students. And bear in mind that you can learn from them as well. Maybe they'll come across a feature of an engine that you just don't know about, or they'll come at something from just a completely different angle that you didn't even consider. Make sure you listen to what they need too. If they think they can do something by themselves without your help, let them. I've spent some time with a developer who doesn't get the hint when I'm sitting there going, okay, thank you, I understand, I'll go and do it now. And he just sits there and he continues to explain to me for 10 more minutes, and I'm just sat there like, yes, I understand how to do this. Can you get your hands off my keyboard so that I can actually do it, please? It's infuriating. So take the hint. If they're like, I understand, I'll do it, trust them. Trust that they can do it. But when they do inevitably make mistakes, resist the urge to grab their keyboard and fix it for them. The best way of learning how to fix mistakes is to fix mistakes. Give them opportunity to figure out where they've gone wrong. Be that rubber duck to talk through where they've made a mistake, but like I say, it's a balance. Please only do this up to a point. If they're sat there completely stuck, help them out. There is nothing more frustrating than sitting there with a person that you know could fix it like that, and they're just smiling okay, yeah, you can figure this out, and you're just sat there totally blank, no idea how to do it, and you know that they could give you a hint right then and there to be okay, yep, now I know where to start. So please help them out if they're genuinely stuck. So once they've got a bit more experience and they've encountered a bit more of the game, redo that whole system overview I mentioned earlier. They'll likely have forgotten some of the things that you've said. Now they've done more work, and they'll be able to understand how the whole structure works more deeply. This will give them a better chance of doing their next tasks well, and as you ease off on the hand-holding. Eventually, I got to a point where I felt comfortable doing certain tasks. When your graduate gets to this point, this is the time when you need to shake it up. Move them into a different area, get them to work with new people. One of the best starts to a career in games is to become a generalist and then specialise, which is a bit of advice that Byron gave when a student came up to me asking me for advice after my last talk. So if you're helping out a graduate, you need to help them become a generalist to begin with and then specialise. Of course, this is limited by how flexible you can be when you're giving out tasks, but the more flexible, the better. If you've been giving them UI tasks, maybe get them to fix something physicsy. If you've been giving them physics tasks, get them to fix something with a metagame. Give them the broadest experience possible so they don't get pigeonholed. Once they've had contact with a fair bit of the system, and you think they're ready, get them to do more technical tasks, ones where the effect maybe isn't as immediately obvious on the whole game. Fixing bugs is always needed. It's a good way to get a feel for different parts of the system, and it will reassure them that they aren't the only one making mistakes and learning. Refactoring is always useful, provided that you're there to give them good guidance on good coding practices if needed. Fixing things to do with external APIs is Never the most fun job, but it will definitely be a useful learning experience. And overall, well-rounded developers are just better developers. That said, again, it's a balance. Don't stop giving them tasks that they do know how to do. It's important that they remember how far they've come and how much they've learned since they started. Celebrate their achievements. They didn't just successfully learn the thing, you successfully taught them the thing. So eventually, once you think they're ready, give them a big challenging task. This might be like a year or more down the line. I'm not talking like soon or anything like that. Because if they end up not being able to do the task at all, or if they end up just making a mess of it, their confidence might take a really big knock. And also, it will delay everything else for you. But once they are ready, once you're sure they can tackle things, this task should be as big as a whole feature, for them to be the code lead all by themselves. My first big feature I can't talk about too much because it has yet to be officially released worldwide, but it's a UI-heavy, server-driven minigame style feature that's really important to the balance of the metagame. I designed its structure, worked heavily with one of our UI artists, learned how to do server communication properly, briefly enlisted the help of our technical artist for some physics things, prodded the designer every so often when there were giant holes in the design that I nearly fell into. And all of these things were just slightly more advanced versions of the stuff that I'd been learning since I started at Hutch. And it got done in 3 months, which was only a week more than I'd estimated. Not bad for a first-timer, if I do say so myself. Also, slightly smug, there was another big feature that was started at the same time, meant to finish at the same time, still isn't out. And that was meant to be back in January. That was with much more experienced developers, so it was a bit of a confidence high, like, yeah, I did the thing, and it was nearly perfectly on time. So yeah, not bad. But clearly, though, I cannot take all the credit here. The senior developers I worked with have been absolutely fantastic at creating an environment where I can learn as much as humanly possible while feeling comfortable enough to ask questions and make mistakes. It's because of them that I've grown so much within such a short period of time. Given them the same level of help and attention, I firmly believe any graduate can do this and more. So, just to sum up all that advice, why should you hire graduates? You should hire graduates because they're cheap. Diversity is great in all circumstances, and age diversity is an important aspect of that. They've grown up surrounded by tech, and they'll find a lot of tools just second nature. They've got hugely different ideas, partly because they've grown up in such a different world, and partly because they've not had existing industry norms squishing them into a box. Working with them is good for senior developers as well, mixing their tested knowledge with new perspectives and mentoring junior developers to help senior devs learn too. Graduates are also likely to be part of your target market, which will inherently just improve your product. Finding graduates to hire is relatively easy compared to other positions, and if you don't hire juniors now, then you will have nobody to hire into more senior positions in 5 to 10 years' time. They're also changing and learning rapidly, so you won't have to undo bad habits learned elsewhere. They're effectively a blank slate, so you can mold them into the role you need. They should be able to grasp new tools quickly, having grown up surrounded by technology, like I say, and best of all, new graduates are very likely to love their jobs. Once you've decided to hire a graduate, this is how to help them as a mentor. Be nice to them. A new graduate job can be very overwhelming. Don't throw them in at the deep end. Give them a straightforward first task, make sure it's self-contained, easy to understand, and has a visible effect on how the game works. Make sure each task has clear guidelines, and start by hand-holding them a fair bit, but ease off as they start to learn. Each subsequent task should build on that knowledge a little bit, and these early tasks should give you an idea of where they need help and where you can leave them to do their thing. Resist the urge to fix their mistakes for them, but at the same time, don't leave them to do stuff by themselves, and be available for questions at all times. And soon you'll be able to give them bigger and bigger tasks until they're doing entire features by themselves, like me. And voila, one freshly made junior developer, ready to take on the world as planned. So thank you very much for listening. So yeah, I will be available and around, so